Yes.
Okay. Good afternoon, friends. It is nice and cold and snowy this February Tuesday. We are so glad that you are here with us. Um, we know that most of you are at home and not in your libraries today, but this will give us an opportunity for maybe you to interact unbothered by the regular day work. So we are going to pass our presentation over to our presenter, Mandy Walters, and she's from a place that I can't say. So she's going to tell you where she works and what she does, and we will get into doing less with less.
All right, let me get hopefully I can get my screen shared the way I want it to. This is always a challenge. Let's see. We need to slideshow. Okay, hit the okay there. Okay, can you guys just see my presentation now? Okay, perfect. Presenter view always throws me off a little bit. I'm like, what can you actually see? Okay, so hello everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me for your in-service this month. My name is Mandy Walters. I am the director at the Oreille County Library District in northeastern Washington. Um, so I have a just a little slideshow to share with you today about doing less with less, the case for scaling services to your budget. I always start by telling people that this is a really challenging topic and that you aren't necessarily going to leave here with a roadmap to like doing this, because there is a lot of thought work, a lot of like partnership work, a lot of kind of like in political terms they call it surfacing, like surface work that you have to do before you can actually implement this. But I'm going to give you a lot of those thought tools as we go, and hopefully if this is something you're interested in, you'll come out with kind of like, okay, here are the steps that if I want to do this, I can start thinking about it in this way. This is this can be library specific, this can be department specific. Libraries operate in a ton of different ways, and so some of the things that I tell you may not work for your library. So take what is good for you and just toss the rest in the garbage. But hopefully, you'll come out of this with something useful. Okay, so to start, I'm going to tell you a little bit about who I am as a person. A former workaholic, current library director. I'm in Washington State. You can see on the little map, I've put a star in the very northeastern corner there. My county is long and skinny. We have 4 locations. We have about 10.5 FTE, and our budget is about $1.2 million. Now, that sounds big. The way we have to do budgets in Washington State means that we have to, any grants that we anticipate getting over the course of the year, we have to count that in our budget so that we can expend it as a part of our budget. So, a lot of that are like capital grants, things that we're hoping to get but aren't necessarily real. If you look at our property taxes, like what is coming in and we know is going to land on our doorstep, it's about $800,000. So that's kind of where we are. Our population in the county is about 13,000. I tell people that we are so rural that we're often classed as frontier in some of our locations. So they're way out there. Um, let's see, what else do I want to tell you here? So this picture that you see on your screen is now about 13 years old ish. I was 29 years old. So, this is a picture of me in my very first library job ever. And when I say former workaholic, this is where that workaholicness started. I was a teen librarian. I'm originally from Arkansas. So, this is the first library I ever worked at in Arkansas. And I love this job. I love this job so much. I had tiny children at the time, and I worked insane hours. I had wild events. I worked myself silly. Like, you haven't lived until you have done a teen scary movie marathon until 1 a.m. with $200 worth of pizza and your toddler sleeping on a pallet outside your office. Like, it is a lot, right? And my family got the opportunity to move to California, which was very exciting for us. And so I left that job. Obviously, I cried when I left that job. But I thought I was bouncing into an environment that was going to be absolutely amazing. I was moving to a county that was much bigger. On paper, it looked way better resourced. It had about 29 branches. I was in Bakersfield, California, if anybody's familiar with California. What seemed like it was going to be a really great opportunity was actually a chronically underfunded library system, and it was limping along. And when I say limping, I do mean limping. They really had two options to improve things. They are either going to have to scale back what they're doing, close locations, trim hours, or they were going to have to figure out a way to get some more money. And I loved libraries in my job so much that I took a partial leave of absence to run a ballot initiative because I was like, we can do amazing things if we just have the money to provide these services. Well, there's a whole bunch of like lawmaking in California that requires new taxes to come with a 65% approval rate at the ballot box. And if anybody's ever tried to get 65% approval at the ballot box these days, it just does not happen. So it didn't work. The funders of this specific library system were basically like, you've got more cuts coming down. And I said, I cannot do this anymore. I swore that if I was ever in a position to lead an organization, that I would not let myself and my staff and my library get into a situation like this, and that I would make these hard choices if I had to. And that is exactly what we are doing here. So tell me if this is a story that sounds familiar to any of you. You love your library and you love being a librarian, and you identify that as a core part of who you are as a person. But maybe your library is under resourced. You don't have enough staff to do all the tasks that go into running a library. So you work off the clock to make sure everything's getting done. Or maybe you don't have enough of a budget to buy new and interesting things for the collection. So you buy them yourself and donate them. I used to spend about $150 of every one of my paychecks buying books for my library because we didn't have the money to buy them. Perhaps you are making minimum wage or just above it, or you have a lot of guilt because you have staff that you're making that are making minimum wage or just above it. They're probably part-time. Maybe they don't have benefits. Maybe you have had ballot initiatives fail, so you just keep grinding, or maybe you are funded at the mercy of elected officials. And they keep holding your budget steady or reducing it even when there's inflationary pressure. So if any of that sounds familiar, that's basically how I got to where I am today. And it made me take a really long, hard look at what in the world I thought I was doing. And so if it's your story, if you see burnout creeping into your library, I hope that we can maybe get you out of that rut. I don't know why we struggle to acknowledge that the things that we do and supply to our communities have a value, but they also have a cost. Everything we do has a value and a cost. Okay. So let's say that you want to host a free program. Okay. We're going to do a free program. We're going to do a story time. Okay. If you talk to people, they'll say, well, story time doesn't cost any money. You can do story times all over the place and it's free. It's free. It doesn't cost any money. Okay. So on the surface, this is a low cost program. People perceive it to be a low cost program. Books are in the library already. Maybe you've got craft supplies laying around. Okay. So in the chat, tell me some costs of this free program. And if somebody wants to shout those out, that would be great. What are some costs of this free program?
Staff time,
Yes.
time to plan, of course,
Yes.
Marketing,
Absolutely.
supplies,
Yes.
utilities,
Yes.
materials, snacks,
Yes. If you do snacks, those really come with cost, even at Costco.
transportation if you take it off-site.
Yes, absolutely. You either have to take the outreach van if you've got one, you're paying mileage to your staff if you don't.
you may have to pay for a room if you leave the library because yours isn't big enough.
Yes, for sure.
Cleaning and cleaning supplies just appeared in the chat.
Excellent. So I'll take you through some of the things that I kind of thought of off just the top of my head. You guys obviously clocked the first one, and that's staff time. You have staff time, not just like picking, you've got to pick the theme, you've got to choose the books, you've got to order the books if they're in a different location, or you've got to go put them together. If you do a craft, you've got to put the craft together. You got to make sure that it's easy enough that parents can help you. So books and materials. I actually, and craft supplies, I actually want my staff to, after story time, I don't want them to be like, okay, bye, and leave. I want them to stay and like interface with the parents and the children. I want them to develop those relationships. And so that's even more staff time. If you even if you have these craft supplies in your library, you've got to figure out, do I need to replenish them now? Do I need to get in touch? The Friends of the Library supply all of our program funds. Do I need to get with the Friends of the Library to get more? If you had to bring items in from somewhere else, perhaps there were shipping costs or interlibrary loan costs or consortium fees. We're a part of a consortium, and we pay not only a fee to be a part of that consortium, but also transportation fees for our courier. Even if a volunteer is running this event, I do not allow volunteers to run events at my library because I think staff has an inherent value and I don't want that to be devalued. There's still time spent involved recruiting a staff member, making sure that or recruiting a volunteer, making sure that the volunteer is doing what you need them to do and maintaining that volunteer program overall. So we are in denial, and we are doing ourselves and our staff and our communities a disservice if we think that we can't or shouldn't think about money when we're thinking about what services we are providing to the public. The library director at my very first library that I loved so much used to prohibit us from saying that our programs were free. We were not allowed to use that language because there's always a cost. We could say that the program was at no charge to participants, but it's not free. It's not free for the library or the friends or the foundation or whoever is funding that program. And I think that it's very imperative that we internalize this point of view and prepare yourself to talk about money with your stakeholders at all levels. How many people have heard this phrase, doing more with less? Okay. So in the chat, tell me some of the negative effects that maybe you have seen from working in a library under this philosophy, this doing more with less philosophy.
I see loss of morale.
Yes.
I'm going to speak about myself, and mine is terrible burnout to the point where I wanted to leave the profession.
Yes.
As another staff member says burnout and says also users burnout. It's not sustainable. It does set a new bar and an expected level that we must maintain.
Absolutely. So I would argue that when somebody says the phrase to you, we're going to do more with less, or, we need to do more with less, that is like an automatic trigger to be on the lookout to need to scale back. It inherently means that there is less funding for some reason. So when you're faced with this phrase coming at you, here are just a few things to think about. So the first is, like, when can you make this work and when is it going to hurt? And this is super individualized. Obviously, different libraries absorb cuts in different ways, and it's really important to have an open line of communication with your staff and your board about capacity early and often. If you have a tiny little cut, perhaps it helps you find some efficiencies. I know libraries are running at almost max efficiency already, right? Because this has been our world for so long. But that's not to say don't give it another look, right? But that can only go so far before you're going to start to lose effectiveness. And even if you're just taking a little cut each year, remember that that does have a cumulative effect and it can end up having a really big impact. 1% this year and 2% next year and 3% the year after that, you're at a 6% cut, which is not nominal anymore. It also would do us good to remember that nothing gets less expensive. So if your funding has been flat for years and years and years, especially now, you've had a budget cut, right? You have effectively had a budget cut. When I've worked at libraries that have had stagnant or actively reducing funding, the train of thought went something like this. Well, if we just work harder, if we get more community members to use us, if we have higher circulation stats, if we have more program attendees, our funders will see our value and they will restore our funding. And if anybody has ever seen that work in real life, email me later because I want to hear your story. I want to hear how you made that happen. Because in my experience, I've never seen that work. And I would argue that overworking ourselves to get those new attendees and those higher circ stats and those new card holders is not going to, we're not going to end up with the fruit that we needed to ensure that we're able to do a good job. And in fact, it could put us in a worse position because we have more demands now and no more resources to meet those demands. And I always just like to point out that our profession is rife with vocational awe. We believe so passionately about what we provide to our communities that we are willing to sacrifice our time and our money and our mental health to do it. But when we do that, it devalues what we do. And so if we want our public and our stakeholders to value us, we have to value us first. Okay, so what are some of the benefits of scaling our services to our budget? The first is that you can prevent staff burnout. Now, overwork isn't the only reason that staff might burn out, but I would say that it's a very big piece of the puzzle. If you are a member, I'm an elder millennial, I'm chronically online. So if you're a member of any of those like library Facebook groups like ALA Think Tank or Library Employee Support Network, if you search for burnout in those groups, you're going to get a spectacular amount of hits come back, right? People are leaving the profession or they're trying to. I mean, how many days a week do you see if you've transitioned out of libraries? Where did you go? What are you doing? I want to go do that. I want to get out of here, right? And so burnout is a big reason for that. So just to give you a little bit of evidence here, turnover at my library is incredibly low. The last couple of staff members that we've had leave were actually high school students that we brought in as sophomores, and they worked until they were seniors, and then they went to college. And so we just do not have turnover at our library. So we're not burning people out. Staff culture is really, really hard to change. And having staff that are constantly under immense pressure to perform with no resources is likely to create a toxic workspace. So I read once that it takes about 7 years to fully flip a work culture. And I found that in my experience to be true. So making sure that your staff has an appropriate amount of work and what they need to successfully execute that work goes a really long way. We are not hospitals. No one is going to die if they don't get their James Patterson hold today. Okay? They're not going to die. They can get it tomorrow. And I tell my staff that all the time. Don't kill yourself we get shipments twice a week. Like if you can't do it because there's a customer at the desk, we can do it tomorrow. It'll be okay. It's not an emergency. When I worked at my library in California, we were not allowed to talk to the public about our budget in any capacity, not even one that was just informative in nature. And from what I could tell, that came from our board of supervisors, who was the sole setter of our library budget. And they wanted to be shielded from public criticism about the massive cuts that the library had been taking for years. There was one year that the library took a single year 40% cut in 1 year. And that didn't stop. It wasn't like we're going to cut you 40% this year and then you've got reprieve. Like there were more cuts coming, right? And so that did not make a lot of sense to me. And I broke the rule once. I was a branch manager, and I had a mom who came in and asked why we didn't have a Lego club. And in this library system in particular, our Friends of the Library funded 100% of programs. There was no established library funding for programs. And so I just let her know that the Friends of the Library fund all of our programs. We don't have a friends group, so we can't fund this program. We can't buy the Legos. She did not like that answer. And so she got a bunch of community members together, started a friends group, wrote grants, and within 6 months, we had an active Lego club at our branch. And that group of women went on to become wonderful advocates for that library branch. So much so that about 2 years ago, that branch pulled out of the county system because they wanted more resources than the county could provide, and the municipality agreed to support the library. And so they have much better library services now because we didn't have a Lego club. And I said, hey, we don't have any money. So give your community the opportunity to advocate to you, to your funders. If I hadn't decided to take that opportunity to inform her, we might not have had that culture of growth take root in that location. All right, so what's next? Before you can lead your team, your department, your branch, your district, anyone in this philosophy, you have to be willing to accept it for yourself. And this can be really hard, especially if you've been operating kind of this grind set ecosystem for most of your career. So for managers and administrators, what this means is that you need to be prepared to set an example. Are you taking your vacation time? Are you coming to work sick? If you didn't take any PTO in 2024, we need to have a conversation later after this. Okay. You're in trouble, right? So I want to give you an example of this. So I went and did the math. In 2024, I took 200 hours of vacation time and 36 hours of sick leave. This year, I already know that I have 3 weeks of planned leave scheduled. For 2 of those weeks, I will be unreachable because I am a Washington stereotype and I go backpacking. And so I'm going to be in the middle of the woods for 6 months in the Cascade, or for 2 weeks in the Cascades, and nobody's going to be able to reach me. Okay. Because I take my time off, so do my staff. So in 2024, my staff took 121% of their annual vacation and personal time. So not only did they use up all their accruals that they got in the year, they actually used some of their carryover from the year before. This kind of thinking and philosophy starts at the top. And I think time away is the best burnout preventer that you can give to your staff. As an aside, when I did this presentation for the Upstate New York group, a whole bunch of them put in the comments like, oh gosh, I've been at my job for 18 years and I only have 1 week of paid time off. Put your oxygen mask on first, okay? I know that we have been conditioned to think that we have to be completely in service of the community, right? It is not selfish to say, this is not, I need more. I need more vacation time. I need the ability to take this vacation time. You can advocate for yourself, and it is not selfish. Okay. Put your life mask on first, so then you can go help your staff. Secondly, think about what can you give up, okay? If you're going to ask your staff to make sacrifices, to drop a program that they really love, if something's on the chopping block, you need to show that you can give up things too, right? Maybe that's a favorite program that you love doing. Maybe that is getting all of your paperwork filed by the end of the day on Friday. If you're working more than your allotted time, if they give you 35 hours a week of pay, work 35 hours a week. Okay. Obviously be flexible. There's an emergency, you can work more, but I comp my time. So there are weeks that I work 6 days a week. The next week I work 4. And I maintain that flexibility because that keeps me sane, and I need to be sane. So be prepared to show your staff basically that you can walk this walk. Don't ask them to do something that you wouldn't also do. So specifically for management, before you can activate your staff, there's a little bit of thought work, a little bit more thought work that you're going to need to do. The first is that I need you to think about how you set your expectations and how you measure success in your organization. If you're scoring annual reviews on a number system, like this is terrible and 0 is terrible and 5 is great, like maybe we don't want to do that anymore. Or if you say you need to shelve 60 books an hour, like maybe we don't want to do that anymore. If you're on a quantity over quality track, think about how to reframe that to yourself and your staff. If you have cuts in resources, or if scaling your services to a more appropriate level is going to cause your staff to miss their goals, then you've put them in an unfair position and you need to reformulate their goals to reflect new expectations. We completely moved away from the numbered quantitative, like whatever. Right now, the way we do our reviews is that you are in competition with one person each year to be better than, and that's yourself. So every year we work together and we set your goals. They're often not measurable. It's often like, I want to learn more about human resources this year. And so we look for webinars that we can send you to, or if the state does a class on HR, we send you to that. It's not like grow program attendance 20% this year, because that's super hard. There are other things going on, other factors, and you can't guarantee your staff are going to be successful. It's like, I want you to compete with yourself. I want you to be a better librarian, library assistant, page this year than you were last year. And that's about you. It's not about anybody else. Okay. I also I have 5 direct people that I supervise, and I ask them during their review time every year, how is your work-life balance? And I want to know because it helps me scale our resources. If I've got a branch manager in here with 2 young children and she's like super stressed out because she feels like she can't get all of her work done, okay, where are we scaling back? Because this is not tenable, right? Next, anticipate your roadblocks. Will staff be expected to shift tasks to those that they like less because you've got other things that need to take precedence? Or will your board be unhappy because one of their pet projects is going to get the axe? So try to think about and get ahead of any issues that might pop up so that you can address them like as they come to you. One thing, again, I'm going to harp on PTO here. You need to be sure that you consider your PTO policy, because having a great policy that gives staff a lot of PTO hours in the bank, but no ability to take those hours when they want or need to take them, you might as well not have it. You're still going to burn out your staff. What good does 240 hours of PTO do your branch manager if it's just sitting in the bank and she can never get the time off, right? It doesn't do her any good. Also consider what resources you can use for those who respond to a more analytical approach. The Connecticut State Library has this fabulous best practices document on their website, and I reference it often because it is pretty comprehensive, and Washington doesn't have anything like it. It's basically like it levels library like good, better, best. And it says, if you serve, between 500 and 1,500 people, here is a great staffing level for a good library and a better library and a best library. Here's a square footage map. Like you should have this many square feet to serve this much population and this much staff and this many, linear feet for books. It's fabulous. So, and if you Google just Connecticut State Library best practice document, it will pop right up. It's a PDF on their website. So if you think that there are going to be budgetary impacts and you need to bring data to the people who respond to data, now's the time to get those ducks in a row so that you can figure out how to shift around money or resources to cover new things that you want to do. And at the end of this thought experiment, you should kind of be able to know what scaling back might look like for your library or your department or your team. So you've decided you're going to do it. You're going to scale back. You've thought about it. You have committed yourself. You've planned for your roadblocks. You're ready to make the case to other people. Where are you going to start? I would argue that the most important group of people that you need to get on this bus are your staff members. So if there are any solo librarians or directors in the house, like, you get to maybe sleep through the slide because you've done it. You're on board. You're the only staff member. But if you're leading other people or making this case to maybe your manager or admin, like trying to start a conversation, you got to get them on board early, or you're gonna have a bad time. So start with telling them the why. If you're making this change with existing staff, why? You guys have likely been overworking yourself for years. Why are you making this change? Why are you making this change now? What has changed within your organization, your structure, your budget, your thought processes to make this happen now when we've been killing ourselves for years, right? This is a much easier process if you're moving into a new role, right? Like, you're becoming a manager, you're setting a new kind of scope for your team, you're becoming a director. We have a new way of doing things. It's going to be easier if that's the case, but it won't necessarily be easy no matter how you come at it. So be sure you've got that why on lock. Why are you doing this? Shockingly, you might get some pushback, especially from your high performers, your bright, shining stars who are just burning with the fire and passion of 1,000 suns right now, right? That was me. I was a star burner. Okay. Or you might get pushback from your staff who are worried about the public and don't want to poke that bear and don't want to deal with public comments, grouchiness, grumpiness, whatever. So hold some space for one-on-one meetings with your staff, okay? If the staff does not feel heard, it can be a poison pill to this whole thing. Then, especially managers, be ready to strategize and collaborate with your staff. Work with them to make a plan that moves the needle while not freaking them out. The goal is that this is something that you do together and it doesn't become something you dictate to staff. However, you should be prepared to hold your staff accountable to the new way of working. I don't know about you, but I have found librarianship at large to be a people pleaser group of humans, right? We want people to be happy. We don't want them to be mad. But this is a time that you have to step up and have these hard conversations with your staff. Sometimes they're not going to believe you when you say, I want you to sit down. I want you to scale back. I want you to do less. I personally have had to take disciplinary action on a staff member who I found out they were working off the clock to avoid overtime, because overtime is like, we can't afford overtime. And so it's forbidden, do not work overtime. And I found them working off the clock, and I had to write them up for that, because in addition to, like, this is not the culture of this workplace, it also has a huge liability for the library district, because they can come back for a long time and claim those hours even if you didn't authorize them. So that was the wake-up call that this particular staff member needed, to be like, oh, she means it. When she said leave it for next week, like, she really meant leave it for next week. Now, boards of trustees are funny because they're different everywhere. So I will tell you, I have a board of 5 that are appointed by our county commissioners, but do not answer to them. So they are an independent governing board. So this could be, instead of board of trustees, perhaps you're talking to a city council or another set of elected officials or an advisory board, or your mileage may vary. That relationship may be different. This is just kind of like, whoever are your bosses, your trustee level people, this is who this is for. So get ready to have conversations with this group of people, whoever they are for you. So for me, the conversation around scaling back and making sure that our budget and our services kind of match began during our decision to run a levy, which in Washington state is like, basically you set your budget to whatever, 50 cents per thousand, and then it falls over time. And so our budget had fallen. And so we had to go back to the voters to set it at 50. But that meant that I had to go to the board and say, okay, listen, if this doesn't pass, we have to make some really hard decisions about what that means and what the budgetary impact is. So I let them know, here are the recommendations as to what I'm going to do if our rate doesn't increase. And I got the board's support for those recommendations. In this instance, we were talking really big changes. So if we ran a levy in 2019, and if it did not pass, I was going to close 2 of our 4 physical locations. Gone. I had enough money to run 2 branches really well or 4 branches poorly. And it was better in my mind to run 2 branches really well, to do all the things that we could do with 2 physical locations. And so I had to get the board on board because those were going to be such big changes if the levy did not go through. I basically had to sit them down and say, listen, we can do X, Y, and Z with our current budget, and that's it. Okay. However, you manage the library. The board's job, in my case, my board's job is to manage me. So I have the authority to make all the smaller cuts to programs, database subscriptions, staffing hours, all of these little things. And I don't need to go to the board. I don't have to loop them into every decision. So you also need to think about, when do they need to know, and when do you not need to have that explicit communication with your board. Okay. Perhaps you can just notify them that a service is going away and they trust your judgment. At the end of the day, you don't necessarily need their permission unless you're talking about something pretty extreme, like I was, like closing locations. But I would encourage you, regardless, to just be frank. Don't couch it. Don't be like, oh, well, we could probably do X if you cut our budget by 5%. No, just be bold. And then finally, stakeholders. And that's basically everyone from the community at large to people that you may partner with, right? Like you've got stakeholders all over the place, and your relationships with those stakeholders are going to be really, really wide ranging. And so that means that your staff, your frontline staff, need to be prepared to answer those wide ranging questions. Depending on what doing less looks like in your library, it could be super obvious that something has changed, something is happening, or it might just affect back of house processes or something that the public doesn't see. But regardless, be sure that your staff are prepared to answer the public's questions. Make it easy. Send it as a Q&A to their email so they have like basically a ready reference guide at their fingertips in the event that they need it. The next thing is be prepared to back up your staff. If any of you are having an easier time with the public post-COVID, like hit me up and talk to me about your public and what you have done, because I think that it has kind of universally gotten more challenging since COVID to deal with the public. And so if you are the manager, the director, the administrator at some level, you need to be prepared to take one or many for the team. There's no amount of money that you can pay your staff that would make taking abuse at a public service desk day in and day out worth it for them. Okay. People who are really mad and they're unwilling to take the answer that your staff is giving them just should get bumped up to you as soon as possible. All of my library locations have a stack of my cards at the desk. And when that angry person comes in and they just will not hear it from our staff, whoever is the frontline staff, they just hit them with a card. Like, talk to our director. Like, our director can answer your questions. Call her, email her. She can help you. You also need to be sure, though, that when that angry person makes it to you, that you don't inadvertently throw your staff under the bus. The buck stops with you. So it's not, Carol's just really burnt out. And so we just can't keep doing 2 story times a week. She just really needs a break. We just do not have the resources to continue to do this, this amount of programming and etc. So be prepared to back them up. We should also be advocates for ourselves. Make sure that your team knows how to direct people so that those people can go to bat for you. There's a fundamental thing about humanity that if you ask for help, people will want to get involved. But the catch is that you have to use the word help for it to be effective. For example, We think City Council will restore our funding if members of the public go and ask them to. Are you willing to help? City Council meetings are Mondays at 6 p.m., right? So have a call to action prepared. If this is like a, like we need more money, we're getting budget cuts kind of situation, tell them how they can help you so that your most passionate supporters can get out there and pound the pavement or rabble rouse or whatever needs to be done. If you have staff members who are not comfortable with this, and I think that you probably do, because I know I definitely do, even my frontline staff who are very good at their job, like this is something that makes them nervous, role play this with your staff to help them get more comfortable making that ask. We do a lot of role play because we want staff to basically have, the ability to like answer on a dime. So if you are in a cut situation where you're taking these budget cuts and you're having to reduce your services, scale your services because of active cuts, I am so sorry that that's happening to you. I do recommend every library, if you think you might be able to go to ballot and get some help. They are really good at what they do, and they have helped multiple of my libraries kind of get some traction in the past. But sometimes cuts are just going to happen anyway. And so in addition to scaling your services for the benefits that we've looked at earlier, you can scale your services to send a targeted message to the public. First off, we should not be putting on a happy face when we are taking budget cuts, okay? Obviously, we're going to continue to provide the best service that we can, but if the public asks you, there's no reason to conceal what is happening at a budgetary level, okay? Trust that your community sees the value in what you do and will rally for you when they see the effects. As a woman who is from the South, I often don't want to make waves. I don't want to make trouble. I tend to couch my words in flowery language to make people feel more comfortable. And I would say, don't do that. Don't couch your words. Don't soften them. Don't sugarcoat it. Again, chronically online. This happened over the summer. There was a library in New Jersey, the Oreille Library. So I don't know if anybody saw this. It was a huge kerfluffle because the board at this library in New Jersey, at the Oreille Library, they were about to take a humongous budget cut. And the board released a statement that was basically like, okay, we're closing the library at 5 p.m. every day. We are having no more after school services. We have no more programs scheduled. We won't be buying any more books. I mean, it was just absolutely devastating. And they were just matter of fact about it. We are taking a budget cut. Here are all the things that are going away. Let us know if you have any questions. And I couldn't believe the amount of librarians who were upset at the tone of that board's press release. They wished that this news had been shared with a more hopeful tone. I remember that one. I'm like, what about this is hopeful? This is devastating. They should act like it is devastating. If you don't act like it's devastating, your public will not see that it is devastating. I would argue that this conveying this kind of message should be frank and clear. What is happening? Why? I also think that it's okay to cut things that affect the public. In fact, I would say that the politically smart thing is to do that, especially if these cuts are happening because of choices that elected officials made. Cut the things that people can see. Maybe you can trim some fat in the back and that has a good impact. But what does your community love? Do they love that historical database? Do they love it? It's $10,000 a year. How much do they love it? Right? Like, cut the things that will help you with your advocacy efforts. And then you have your call to action, asking people to help, directing their advocacy. So that's part of the strategy. Don't just cut things and then be like, oh, what you can do. Like, be smart with it. Don't pretend you're fine. Don't sugarcoat it, and then be smart and have that call to action ready for your public. This is a philosophy and like a way of working that needs constant tending. Library staff feel a lot of pressure to be everything to everyone, and that's not a feeling that just goes away because the workload decreases. Okay. It's really important to keep a watch and make sure that old habits aren't making their way back around. Once you've got everyone on board and working this way, you potentially have some threats that could pop up to undo this work. One of them is that you bring on a new Shining Star staff member who's not accustomed to this way of working. They're going to come in with the fire of 1,000 suns, and they're going to make the rest of your staff feel insecure, right? So you have to be sure that you're onboarding people and being like, this is how we do things here. Okay. Also, be sure that your staff feel comfortable talking to you about their capacity. I was a Shining Star person. Sometimes that comes back. And because I'm in administration now and I don't work as a frontline worker, sometimes I have ideas and things I want my staff to do, and it's too much for them. And I feel very fortunate that we have an environment here. And this happened just a couple of months ago when I said, hey, this would be a great opportunity for us. Can we do it? And my branch manager said, Mandy, we're tapped right now. Okay, you're tapped. You tell me you're tapped. I believe you that you're tapped. We are not putting that on your plate. And if I still want to do it, perhaps I can make the time to go do that piece of outreach or organize that program, right? Because they're not saying it's not a worthwhile endeavor. They're just saying we don't have the capacity to take on that next thing, right? Create an environment where they're comfortable saying that to you. It's really important. All right. Okay. So think about the threats. We talked about that. Okay. So finally, though, don't get so mired in making sure that everything is just so that you miss chances to grow your funding or snag a cool grant that requires a little bit more effort, but will also be beneficial for the community. Don't be complacent. Okay. You can continue to push towards greatness, even within the bounds of this philosophy. So even though we adhere to this like way of working at my library, there are still times that I ask more of my staff. I talked about them saying, no, we don't have capacity, but every once in a while they know it's really important, right? So the example that I like to give is that I have a staff member who does not work Monday, Tuesday, or Sunday, Monday. Her days off are Sunday, Monday. And I have a hard respect for those days off. I might email you. I expect that you're not looking at your email because I am in the office on Mondays. But we had an opportunity to get a grant to do our strategic planning. And it was kind of last minute. It was a lot of money, and we could hire consultants. Like all the stars were aligning, right? Except that the only day they could do a kickoff meeting was a Monday. That was the only day. And so I got in touch with my staff member who has Mondays off and basically said, I don't ask you to rearrange your schedule ever, but I'm asking that you do so for this meeting. It's very important. I would not have scheduled it on a Monday if I could get it on any other day. And feel free to comp your time out the rest of the week. And she, wasn't like, golly gee, this is great. But she was very much like, you're right, you don't ever ask this of me. And so because we work in this way and they know that I don't ask unless it's very important, my staff is willing to have that degree of flexibility because I have that degree of flexibility with them. Okay. They know that I'm not asking if there was any way I could get around it. Okay. I hope that has been useful for you. I want to answer all of your questions that we have time for. And if you have further questions or if you want to see a copy of our reviews, how we do our reviews, I have a blank copy that I can send out to you. And so you can take a look at that if you want. And then otherwise, like, hit me with all of your questions if you have questions.
First, please do send Patty the review. We have a LibGuide, a resource guide where
Okay.
we have staff evaluation forms and things like that, and we'd love to be able to add that up. It gets a lot of hits.
Cool. Yeah, I'll send that to her once we are all done here.
Thank you.
Mandy.
Yes.
Hi, I'm Mary Beth. I'm with the Great Bend Public Library, and it sounds like our library is about the same size. since you are the burning star type of personality, what are some boundaries you had to set with yourself to kind of catch your um, instincts to go back to that burning star? Some ways that you can kind of say, oh, this is a sign that I'm on that path to burn myself out, or I've said yes to too many things. What are your boundaries and how did you find those?
Yeah. The first one is that my board has me as a 40-hour-a-week employee and I work 40 hours a week. And I have that hard set for myself. And as I said earlier, there have been times when it's like everyone is sick and we really need someone to do 4 hours at the library before somebody else can come in. And I'm like, and it's on my day off. And I feel, because I'm the director and I'm salaried, that it's my responsibility to pick that up. But those 4 hours are 100% coming off of my next week. Right. So I have the ability to flex my schedule, and my board enshrine that in policy that a salary director can have that. So I don't clear it with my board. They know that I'm doing my job. I just, I keep an active schedule online. Everybody knows where I am, when I am. And so that has probably been the number one thing for me, is sticking to my 40 hours a week. I also hired really competent staff that I don't worry about. So if I have an open position and I get 15 applications and they're 15 duds, they're 15 duds. I don't hire from the pile. Okay. So we are only hiring competent people who I am sure can do the job. We are not just finding a body to put in a place. Right. And so that means that I'm not worried. I'm not worried that my branches are spiraling out of control. When I go for 2 weeks and I'm in the woods and nobody can reach me, I tell my staff, make good decisions. Nobody will be in trouble when I get back for making the best decision you could at the time. Like, I'll see you in 2 weeks and we'll talk about it. So having those competent people in place that you trust, I think, is also really good for this. And I personally, and I don't know if this is like a generational thing, I very much value a flatter hierarchy as opposed to a siloed hierarchy in my work life. And so I am the boss, the buck stops with me. I am the final decision maker. I know all of that, but I am making decisions with my staff more than I am making them for my staff. And so I think that lends itself to developing a culture of trust also. Like, I trust that they helped me make these decisions to set policy. I didn't dictate anything to them. I'm not worried about them. And so they feel like they can come to me with feedback and for collaboration. And I don't know if any of that makes sense. I hope it does. But
it does, yes.
Okay, good. Having that trust between staff, and with 4 locations, like, I am not in their buildings every day. And I don't see them every day. And so we have to have a really open line of communication to make it work. And so that has really helped me to trust them, so that when I'm like, I'm going to shining star at you a little bit, they're like, we're not having this right now. And I'm like, okay, understood, heard.
So what do you do if you have a staff member that you can't trust?
I would ask why I can't trust them, and where are they in, like, if you have to think about your hierarchy, where are they in that hierarchy, right?
Mhm.
So if there's a staff member that I can't trust that's 2 levels down from me, that my branch manager hired, I have to trust that my branch manager is going to deal with that appropriately. I know it is not fun doing disciplinary action. It is not fun firing people. I have fired people, and I do not let it drag out. I do not let it drag out. We had a staff member who was wonderful for so long, and then suddenly became unreliable, was late, barely getting to, like 45 minutes late to show up for their shifts, just absolutely uncommunicative about what was happening. And they were 2 levels down from me. So they were underneath one of my branch managers. And once we realized it was a pattern, she immediately was in my office so that we could game plan. Like, we love this staff member. We want to keep them. There's obviously something going on. Like, the first step is X. And when we did X, like the next step was termination if they didn't, it was a performance improvement plan. And there were no second chances after that. Like, we've given you this performance improvement plan. You know, within 2 weeks of being on this PIP, you have not performed. You've done the thing we've asked you not to do. And therefore, we terminated him immediately. And so, you know, if it's that kind of untrustworthiness, like be in collaboration very quickly. Don't let these things fester, because again, that's a great way to have a toxic work environment. Like, this person became unreliable and it was dragging the entire team at this branch down. And so, you know, if
It's
it
hard to
is,
make those decisions, but they need to be
yes,
made.
yes. And we have a a professional code of conduct. We have a professional code of conduct. And it's very easy for us to just be like, this is literally against our professional code of conduct. Like, it's an easy case to be made because we have this policy in place, and we can say, you know, I'm sorry, like, you have violated all of these. And so and I told him during his termination, I said, this does not say anything about your humanity or like who you are as a person. This is just not working. And so I would say it depends on the type of untrustworthiness,
Yeah.
but don't hang on to your dead weight because you're scared of cutting the dead weight.
So you talked a little bit in generalities, but what was the one big thing that you cut?
Well, I wish I could spin you around and show you what my office looks like.
So cleaning your office is it?
It is definitely, I am not a fabulous paperwork gal. I have folders that I stick paperwork in that need to be filed. Like, I know where these things need to go. But it takes like time to do that. And if I'm going to stick to my 40 hours a week, my paperwork is not going to get filed. And so I also have, what else is on my desk? I
Now,
have,
one of the things that I tell people is that it is your job to take an hour every week to work on clearing off your desk and to
yeah,
answer your emails. That's part of your job. Do
yes,
that.
yes.
I have a puppy I need to let out. I'll be
Oh,
right back.
yeah. Yes. Like, I've got books on my desk that need to go back to Ingram because they arrived to us damaged that I haven't taken care of. I've got a pile of school library journals that need to be filed away because the staff have already seen them. So for me, the thing I gave up was like desk maintenance, like office maintenance. So, like, once a quarter, I clear my calendar for an afternoon and sit on the floor with Spotify going and file everything.
This is Patty. I remember Gail when she was the director of the Great Bend Library, as well as our director, um, sharing with me a complaint from a staff member who marched into her office the one day to complain about, as I recall, another staff member. And Gail's response to that person was, well, right now I'm working on my board report and my board preparation to ensure you all get raises. So, do you want me to deal with the thing that I've already heard from you this week, or do you want me to work on getting your raises? And that one has stuck with me as middle management going, that's a really good sentence to make, because sometimes the work that you as solo librarians, and we have several in our room today, and you as managers have to do things that don't always look like the fun work. And
Mhm.
I'm with you, Mandy. Gail has to remind me that I need to sit on the floor with my music going and clean off my desk and underneath it because more boxes are there. So
Stop naming the piles and tend to them.
Yes.
Thank you so much for spending your afternoon with us.
Yes, I'm so glad to do it. And if there are any questions that you have that you didn't get to ask today, please email them to me. I will get the review over to Patty this afternoon so she can add it to your repository. And I'm always happy to help. I've been doing this 8 years, which is not that long, but it's long enough to have a little bit of like a little bit of information and knowledge. So I'm always happy to answer questions and give like advice if you are looking for advice. So
You can unmute yourself if you'd like.